Happy New Year, and welcome to Out of the Fold. I have a theory. People who leave a religion commonly do so with an antagonism that is relative to how restrictive and all-encompassing their experience was with it. I came up with this theory when I learned that many ex-Muslims have views about Islam that are much more negative than those commonly held by, for example, many ex-Christians about Christianity, and I investigated why. A resounding explanation ex-Muslims have is that many Muslim-majority countries are led by governments that impose laws based on fundamental interpretations of Islamic holy books. Theocracy, in this way, does not exist in modern Christianity, despite the fact that some ex-Christians in the U.S. call the United States a theocracy. And I believe they are speaking from experiences that at the time honestly felt, without hyperbole, like they were living under religious law. The difference, though, is that if someone hurts others in the United States for abandoning their beliefs, that person has at least a greater chance than 0% of being charged with a crime. As I listened to more and more ex-Muslims, I found myself at a crossroads of not wanting my show to be anti-religious in nature, and also not wanting to only publish conversations with people who hold views I might find more positive. Doing the prior felt like I ran the risk of giving fuel to bigots, while doing the latter felt dishonest. After going down an internet rabbit hole, I found out that lots of people who criticize religion avoid doing so about Islam, or they do so extremely carefully. I'd like to make this show for a long time, but people on YouTube have had their content challenged by administrators because apparently it is seen by many to be xenophobic to criticize Islam. The problem with this argument is that you have to say it's also xenophobic for people who aren't Christian to criticize Christianity, and if you do that, then I guess it's good that you aren't a hypocrite. But I know when I was younger, I would have welcomed someone telling me I wasn't alone in questioning my beliefs. I wouldn't have cared if that person was formally of my religion or another, and I found that opinion to be shared by my guests. So let's be honest about what this is really about. People who say you can't criticize Islam have that view because they think it's already tough enough for Muslims in countries where Islam is not the majority religion, so why do anything to justify the actions of people who make it that way? If you criticize religion and rigidly stand against people who say you can't, I think you need to realize that this is where their view is coming from, and it has real merit, if only because its basis truly is empathy, not censorship. Equally, though, claiming Islam is exempt from criticism and skepticism is to alienate millions of ex-Muslims who were persecuted by not just one rogue community, but the system of an entire country. Many atheists will jump to saying that Islam is the problem, just like any other religion. I disagree. While I believe all religion should be questioned, I think it's what you do with holy words that defines your character, like a test in a way. If you read the Bible or the Quran and elevate the parts about peace, love, and generosity, I'd much rather spend time with you than an angry atheist. If you read them and latch onto the parts about intolerance and violent punishment, you are an extremist. This extremism is something my guest today actively speaks out against. His name is William Mehrvarz. He is a religious freedom activist and a former Muslim who now openly practices Judaism. No religious organizations, companies, or individuals were contacted for comment about any of the content of this episode. The views expressed are strictly those of the ones expressing them. Our conversation began on a Sunday afternoon.
I was born in Iran, the capital of Iran, Tehran, and I was born into a family that is pretty religious, and I was born into a Muslim family. The majority of the population in Iran are Muslims, about 98%, 99%, some say. And religion plays a very important role in everybody's lives and everybody's daily lives since 1979. Because after 1979, prior to 1979, there was the king, the Shah, ruled Iran, and there was more uh, religious freedom in the country. But after 1979, when the Islamists came into power and they took they overthrown the Shah, they imposed their own system of government. The political system changed to an Islamic republic by a majority of votes. I believe it was like 98% of the population voted yes to the question, do you want Islamic Republic? Yes or no? And after 1979, the first thing that happened was that the constitution changed, the laws changed, and everything was changed in accordance to Islam. And one thing that I can think of off the top of my head was that marriage age prior to 1979 was 18. After 1979, it changed to 9 because that's what Islam allows. And soon after, women came to streets to protest a specific law that was targeting them, which was the mandatory hijab. It happened 1 year after revolution, so in 1980, the law was imposed and it went into effect. The founding fathers of the Islamic Republic of Iran said because this country is founded based on Islam, then Islam should rule. And one of the major prohibitions or restrictions that Islam has about women is the type of garment they wear or how they wear, which states that they should cover their heads, that they should cover most of the parts of their body, they should wear loose clothing. And they were upset because half of the population, women, half of the population were being limited with that law. But unfortunately, they didn't have enough power or enough say in that situation, and the law was imposed. And ever since, women are obligated to cover up in public places, and we see time to time sometimes the police raid some parties, underground parties or private parties, because they have mixed dancing, they have alcohol. Oh, alcohol! Another thing that was banned after 1979 was alcohol. So I grew up. I was born about two decades after, almost 2 decades after 1979, and about 2 years after the war. And my father, who participated in the war, he lost his arm. He lost one arm and a leg in the war when the mortar was fired next to him, was exploded next to him. But my father was not married then. He got married after that incident, and he went through a lot, of course. During the revolution, he was very young, and he was just, I don't know how to put it, but he was interested in like seeing what's going on in his surroundings, like I was. From a very young age, I started to question Islam. The reason that I started to question it is because Islam doesn't really allow questions. Islam doesn't leave room for people to ask questions, to doubt about something. You need to have ultimate belief in that, and if you don't have that belief, if you don't believe in what they tell you, there's something wrong with you. You have to change. You have to study more. And no matter how much you study, if you don't come to that conclusion, it's not enough. So we don't really hear much about other faiths and religions because, again, majority of the population is Muslim. So all you see, all you interact with is Islam and other Muslims. There is a minority. Islam has two major sects: Shiite Islam and Sunni. and Iran is majority Shiite, and Shiites are in the world a minority. From 1.3 or 1.4 billion Muslims in the world, 1.1 of them, 1.2 of them are Sunnis, and only 200 million Muslims are Shiites. Islam is very divided in that sense, ideologically and also politically. And Iran is the leader, claims to be the leader of the Shiite world, and of course the Muslim world, because they try to unite people, but uniting people is like, you have to convert to my religion so that I can accept you. And this ideology also exists in Islam, that everybody else should convert to Islam. I mean, the good thing is that they give people choices. They give people the choice of the sword or the book, which is, I think, fair to them. So I grew up with that ideology that we need to convert everybody, but I never learned who those everybody were. I didn't know who's the other, who is that 2% or the rest of the world. The world in textbooks, on TV, news shows, everything else. You hear the word Muslims and non-Muslims, but who are they? What do they do? What religion, what God do they worship? It's very unknown and unclear for people who are very young. I started questioning everything at a very young age, and when I was 13 years old, I met a person who was not Muslim for the first time in my life. Mm-hmm. I was in a summer camp, and the summer camp was specifically for people whose fathers or parents, if one may say, were in the war, and they fought in the war. They were injured or they were killed. Some sort of a veterans service thing for specifically these children that are related to these families. Mm-hmm. In the summer camp, when I met this non-Muslim person, I didn't really know much about him. So I saw him. I don't remember the details, but I saw him in one of the dorms that we were staying, and there were other people. I think they were high schoolers, so they were younger than me. I was 13. I was like first year of middle school, or like 6th, 7th grade, something, and they were like high schoolers. Mm-hmm. And the majority of them spoke better English than the rest of the people because they were high schoolers, first of all, and this guy was also not Muslim, so I'm assuming his family had trips and travels outside the country, or he had family abroad. So the first connection that we had was English, and then that's the first time. A fun fact about my life is the word soda. That's how I know it from him, because they were drinking like Pepsi and stuff, and they were telling me this is soda, and I was like, what is a soda? And they were like, this is a bubbly. And anyway, let's just call him Mark. I'm not comfortable disclosing his name. Mark was reading his Bible for prayers or whatnot, and it was in Farsi because he was. We have a minority, that 2% that I talked about are like Armenians, Christians, Jews, Baha'is, Dervish, and everybody else. So Mark was Armenian, Iranian, and he was reading that Bible in Farsi. That fascinated me, that like, oh my God, you're not Muslim. What a surprise. What are you? Talk to me. Tell me more. What is this? And he gave the book to me to read a little bit, and I was reading it. I was fascinated by like the language. So I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to read God's book in Arabic. That's so interesting. It's in Farsi. I can relate to it more. And so, as you might know, the Bible consists of the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's mm-hmm. like two separated sections, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And I was reading the New Testament that talks about more about Jesus. It's more Jesus oriented. And I really didn't have a lot of stories of Jesus in Quran, although his name is mentioned a few times, but I really didn't have a lot of stories to connect to. with that book. But the Old Testament, on the other hand, was this fascinating book that spoke about the creation, and then Abraham, and then his sons, and then we had the Noah flood, and then we had the whale, or that's something that the Jonah went into its stomach, and it was fascinating to read these stories
Mm-hmm.
in a language that I connected to because it was my mother tongue. It was not Arabic, and in like small differences that was fascinating to me. I also forgot to mention that Islam, something that I first initially questioned, like after that incident, that event when I was 13, Islam claims to be a global religion. It's a globalist religion. It wants to expand itself to a global level. It wants everybody to adopt it. But yet it speaks only Arabic. And I'm like, how can you connect that to, like, not everybody speaks Arabic. I understand that this is Islam, but why should I learn a new language in order to worship to the God that is a global God,
Mm-hmm.
that is universal? So that was also another initial question for me. And when I found that Bible, I was fascinated by the fact that I could understand the language easily.
Hmm.
I brought that idea to my parents, and I told my parents about, like, hey, look what I have discovered. Look what I have discovered. This is fascinating. Did you know that, like, there are, like, Armenians that they don't worship to Allah? And did you know this and that? And my parents were upset. They were like, okay, he has touched the forbidden fruit, and we have to stop this right now, right here. So my dad, I always had this interest into languages, and it started with English. And so my dad gave me a Quran in English because he thought maybe I connect to English more, so maybe this Quran could help me get on the right path, like righteousness or whatever he was thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
But it really didn't make sense to me because I have read this book throughout my life. I have read this in school. I have read this at home. I have read this in a mosque. I've read this in religious ceremonies. I've read this multiple times. I'm looking for something new. But it really didn't mean to them anything, because to them this is the final word that God has given to human beings, and it needs to be adopted by everybody. And they really think, or they really believe, that that day would come, that the flag of Islam is going to be waving above every building in the world, everywhere in the world, and that is a little bit scary to me.
Hmm.
So when I was listening to other episodes of the podcast, it was really interesting for me to hear actually that other religions in their extreme forms, in their extreme level, they share a lot. For example, premarital sex is something that all of them, they were like, this is the red line. You don't cross this. For a woman, if you're not a virgin by the time you get married, you're like a used tissue. That's the exact expression that my parents, for example, use time to time to relate to other people, or that's something that we would see as part of I call it the propaganda billboard in the street. They like refers to women who are not virgins as these used tissues, which is disgusting and it's misogynist and it's like ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And besides of not being able to connect to other religions, I was also not really in touch with the other sex, because I just knew my mother, my grandmother, my aunts, and cousins, female cousins, and that was it. Schools are all, again, after 1979, all the schools were, I don't know if this is the right word, genderfied. And so they're like, there's only one gender who goes to this school, and that school. The girls have their own school, boys have their own school.
Right.
And so I didn't really have that connection to the opposite sex, and I'm sure they also didn't have that besides family or like expanded friends. Or we would see them in the streets and we would like follow girls to see like, oh my God, what's going on? But we were scared because if the police would find out, it would be like big trouble. And it was interesting for me to see that also exists in Mormonism or Christianity in its other forms. And my thoughts, so I was also playing a lot of video games, like I think all the young people did, and I used to play Sims a lot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. SIMS.
Oh yeah, I love The Sims.
You build houses and you can build families.
Yep.
And stuff. And the last time I played it was because I was talking to a friend of my father's, and I was talking to him about like this game, and I said, oh yeah, I was like, there were men and women in this house, and then you kiss and hug multiple times, and then boom, there's a baby. Now I know how babies come to this world. And that was the last time I played that game, because then I was reported to my father and he took away that game. So that's also my idea of like how kids are born. And but of course later on it changed with the help of internet, dial-up, and then meeting cousins who were not really that religious, and they had connections or other friends who would show them pictures and stuff. And also in school, we learned a lot about the afterlife and how horrible those stories were. They terrified me. Like I would have nightmares about like, oh my God, if I'm not a good Muslim, this is what's gonna happen to me. If I do this, if I look at a woman, I'm gonna burn in hell for the rest of eternity.
Right.
And I mean, the rest of eternity, that's not the right word to say, but anyway, you get me. And that idea of, I think it's similar to Christianity. It was when it was like listening to one of the podcasts, and the girl was explaining, the lady was saying that, yeah, there is an actual literal fire that you will be put into when you will burn. And that's horrible to say to kids, because they're kids. Their imagination is unlimited and limitless. So they create, building these images for themselves, and that was crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember in high school there was this Quran teacher. So everybody we have Quran classes for every single grade, from first grade up to the end of high school, and also in college. You have to have Quranic studies. There's no escape. You always have that. And this guy was very conservative politically and religiously, and he was showing us as high school kids these awful, disgusting videos of Sunni Muslims kidnapping Shiite Muslims, bringing them to the desert and executing them, like shooting them in the head. And it was just disgusting. And I was like, why would you do that to hide? Like, why would you show these graphic images without blurring them? But it was disgusting. All those pictures are naked in my head. I think they're going to stay there forever, and it's just sad. And that happened when I was transitioning, when I was in this turmoil of identity and ideology. It was by the end of my puberty, and I was also in this religious turmoil, as I said. And and that was like hurting me a lot. Going back to after when I discovered everything about uh, non-Muslims, and after my father took away everything from me and gave me the Quran, I continued to study on my own, continued to research on my own about this new phenomena to myself that I had discovered, to learn more about it, to maybe find another way, a more um, merciful God, a less violent God that doesn't want to impose anything on me. And it was very difficult because religion was being shoved down my throat every day, and I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have access to people, to resources, to books, or anything else. Internet was still dial-up, so it was very difficult to search on websites about my the topics that I was interested in. But but I tried, and I got into history, and I got into the more recent histories of Europe, which was the Second War, and then from that I got back to this cycle of finding Judaism and Jews, who they were, what happened to them, and I was interested in like learning more about them. Why are these people being persecuted? Why did that aggressive German guy wanted to kill them? What was the reason?
Mm-hmm.
There were rumors like that like my friends would tell me, or my like school teachers would tell me, like, yeah, his mother was killed by a Jew, so that's why he hated Jews and he wanted to kill all of them. And my father always took me to religious ceremonies, and in order to like keep me on the track in a sense, so that I receive whatever propaganda that the Iranian regime is broadcasting. He was more aggressive than my mother. My mother had that little maternal compassion
Mm-hmm.
within her. Also, I was technically her third child because my parents had two other children that they were born dead. It was not a miscarriage, but the kids were born dead. So it meant a lot to her that I'm alive, that I breathe, that I'm this flesh and blood. Although there is another brother after me, 2 years after me. He's 2 years younger, but still, I was that first child. She wanted to give a lot of care to me. She wanted me to be what they envisioned, a good Muslim. But again, on the other hand, she had that compassion, but my dad didn't. Plus, I'm guessing that he had a lot to deal with in his 20s, because he was 21 years old when he lost his arm and leg, and he definitely witnessed a lot of his friends or comrades, I don't know what's the other word, die, and that gave him a lot of PTSD. So I think that's one of the reasons that my father was more aggressive, and he was very, very violent sometimes. And whenever he would find out that I got a new, for example, I got a new book that I'm reading, he would like aggressively wrestle me. Or whenever I was playing Call of Duty, he would aggressively wrestle me. Or whenever I would, he would find out that I'm like dating a girl, that I'm like talking to a girl, he would really, really be upset and pissed about that. This is not good. If you want, you have to marry somebody who's religious, and there's no dating. We need to find that person for you.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, my parents decided that this is too much, and I'm out of control. And the family was in turmoil because of me. We had to move a lot. Because the schools didn't really accept me anymore, because I was questioning everything and I was asking questions. And the teachers were very upset with that fact. And I was always called to the principal's office. And so the situation was not good. They sought support and from therapists, religious therapists. When I talk about therapists, it's not that somebody you go to talk to. It's somebody you go to be talked to, so that they can tell you how wrong you are.
Yep.
And it wasn't really somebody who I could vent out, who could listen to me. It was more of me sitting down, being lectured about how I should behave as a Muslim. And that didn't work out. They sought out clergy. Clergy talked to me. My dad had a lot of friends who were imams, and they were disappointed. They were like, this is not working. We're giving him all the resources. This is not working. So maybe something is wrong with him. Maybe something is wrong in his head. And it's very difficult for me to talk about that, especially recently. I have discovered a lot of other details about how they made this decision to commit me to a mental institution, to a mental hospital. And it's just sad, and I can't help it, and I can't do anything about it. I was being oppressed, and instead of listening to me, they tried to just put me into a bin, close the lid, put their fingers into their ears until I shut up, and then open it up, look at me like, are you cured? Are you now that Muslim guy? Are you not seeking any other religion? And
take your time, William. Oh my God.
Yeah. And when they did it, part of me was still that persistent guy that like, no, fight back. They can't do it. They can't do anything. But the other part was like, hey, dude, you can't survive. You were in a mental institution, and you were a teenager. The rest of the people are in their 40s, their late 40s, or late 30s, and you are wearing clothing that is so loose because it doesn't fit you, because they don't really commit people in your age here. Stop, what is that word? Stop resisting. You can't do it. So I had to stop because it was just too much. And I met with them. But they were meeting with me regularly. They, I mean the therapists and psychologists, psychiatrists, whoever they were, and the clergy who would like pray over me at night. They would like give me injections of different drugs and things like that. And I wasn't there for about 7 to 10 days. I don't remember from the new, I call it evidence, from the new details that I've discovered. It was about 10 days. Closer to 10 days. And the last meeting that I had was like, yeah, thank you for showing me the right way. Thank you for helping me find peace and tranquility in Islam. And they were happy about it. They thought it worked. They thought all the drugs, all the lectures, all the lessons, all the talking worked. And I was that guy that they were looking for. Yeah. And that was the key for me to get out. And I had to sneak into my loneliness corner of my life and be like all by myself. And I had to listen to all of this because my father would take me to these religious ceremonies. Now that I'm this true Muslim with this Muslim facade, I have to go to these ceremonies, especially Fridays when they go to a Friday prayers. It's a mass prayer. It happens in every city, every parts of every city. In Tehran, where I grew up, especially, it's the the biggest one because major political figures live in Tehran. Major places and academic, religious places are located in the capital. And the University of Tehran, ironically, it's a university, but they use it for religious purposes, was the venue for this mass prayer in Tehran. And I don't have numbers. I don't know how many people would gather weekly every Friday there, but it's a lot of people. The Tehran University is very big. It was built during the Shah's time as projects of development and more westernized or modernizing the country. That's why they built universities. So it's big, and it's a huge campus, and people would like go beyond the campus in the streets, and they would pray in the streets. So just to give you a picture of like how big it is, and after the prayer, or I think it's between two prayers, I'm not too sure, there's a speech usually about like 45 minutes or half an hour or something. The speech is given by this religious figure or sometimes a political figure, depending on what's happening in the world at that time, what's happening in the country at that time. And according to Islam, that is a moment that they have to show the minorities how powerful they are. So when they are giving the speech, whoever is delivering that speech stands up behind the podium and leans onto traditionally onto a sword, but right now they lean onto a gun. They hold the gun and they lean onto it while they're speaking. I think it's the right hand or left hand. I'm not too sure about the details, but they do that. And while they're leaning on it, they're talking about they will destroy Israel, they will destroy the West, they will bomb Tel Aviv, they will bomb Washington, D.C., they will turn the White House into a great mosque. And after the whole ceremony, the whole service, everybody goes out into the streets marching and chanting. And this is the fun part. This is where they burn the flags. And again, depending on what's going on in the world, the chants could vary, but the most common chants are death to America, death to Israel. And I remember sometimes there was one time there was this, I think it was about the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN wanted other countries to adapt to, and specifically about sex education. They were like, oh, you have a lot of rapes in your country. You need to like educate people, educate children that a stranger is not allowed to touch you. And if they did, go to somebody and talk about it. Don't let them get away with it. Mm-hmm. But they really didn't want that to be in the curriculum. So they were like, death to the UN, death to France, death to the UK, and everything else. So death to human rights. That was one of the things that they were saying, because they believe human rights are not divine and are man-made. So we don't need to adopt them. And I had to deal with all of that, and I had to participate, and I had to tell everybody that let's destroy this, let's destroy that, because I didn't have a choice. It was not. Iran is one of those countries that people really can't understand it unless they experience it. It's not like there are options that you can choose in between, and then you can choose like, oh, I don't want to participate in this right now, or I'm deciding to immigrate, I'm going to leave right now. No, it's very difficult. For a man, it's difficult because men above the age of 18, they're obligated to serve in the military, and women, in order to obtain a passport, they need written permission from a male guardian, let it be a father, brother, husband, whoever it is. And whenever that passport expires, they have to get the new permission, or even if they have the permission, the husband or that male person has the right to take it back. It's not something that is given to a woman and it stays with them when it's given. If it was, it would have been less discriminative, but it's something that, no, that's not how it works. And lots of stuff to talk about.
We've got time. I mean, I'm amazed. I mean, you described it also earlier. I mean, that people were kind of given like the choice of sword or book. When you described that, I mean, were you sort of referring to the option of like becoming like a soldier or an imam? Like, was that what you were referring to, or was it something a little bit more complex than that?
No. Sorry if I didn't make myself clear. So Muslims, in general, they give non-Muslims an option: pick the book, or like convert to Islam, or we kill you.
Gotcha. Convert or die is basically what that means.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct. And of course they say, they are like, no, you don't really have to convert. We'll give you resources for you to study. You will, by the end of your studies, you will choose Islam. It's pre-programmed in your brain. It's just a matter of you reading this.
Mm-hmm.
If you read this, you're gonna choose it. And it's like, no, it's not like that. People might have different preferences. People might not be okay with chopping off a thief's hand. Yes, to them it might be justice, but to me it's not, because it recently happened. Recently, I mean, like a number of months ago, and this guy who was very poor in a northeastern city called Mashhad, he was very poor. So what he did was, like, he stole a couple of sheep from somebody's village, and then the authorities arrested the guy, and they asked him, which hand did you use to steal the cattle? And he was like, whatever, the right or whatever hand. They chopped his hand off.
Yeah.
And their logic was that this is what the tradition, this is what the law says, this is what the Sharia says, and we are obligated to exercise it. And they did it. And you know what that leaves the guy with? That leaves the guy with only one hand. He couldn't find a job when he was not disabled. Now he's disabled. He cannot ever find a job. He's still poor. He doesn't have a source of income. You just made the situation worse instead of helping the guy. This is not justice. And Iran doesn't really count the disabled. It's not a how do I say this? It's not a fair country. If you're an able-bodied male who is devout to Islam, and politically he also aligns with the supreme leader or the right-wing rhetoric, then you are fine. You can easily find a job. You can get paid well. You have a lot of resources. But if you are a woman with the same characters of that, you might have less rights than that. And let's put it this way: if you were a disabled convert, a female who's also a lesbian, that's not going to work out well for you. Oh, about the LGBT community, they also think that the LGBT being gay is a disease, and they need to cure that. They need to, like, they put gays into mental hospitals. Same experience, maybe relatively different, that I did, and they also changed their minds, or they make sure that they tell them that if you don't change, you have to face the punishments, which is execution, simply. The answer to a lot of questions are like, oh, kill him. We can solve this, oh, kill him. And they do it very often for a lot of different reasons. Somebody who's the opposition, political opposition or dissidents or journalists who don't really talk good about them, or people who have done money laundering. I mean, money laundering is bad, but should it be punished by death? Because I don't know, humanity, value of life. So it's not just the LGBT and the converts. It covers a broad number of people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I want to talk about a little bit about my mother's family.
Okay.
So my mother is also religious, but she's a little bit more lenient compared to my father. My father is more right wing, both politically and religiously. But surprisingly, their families are the opposite. So my mother's family is very religious. My father's family is like less religious than my father. And so my grandfather on my mother's side, who passed away this January, and he did not let my mother go to school prior to 1979 because he was very religious and he was part of the movement who opposed the Shah, and the Shah was trying to westernize and modernize the country, and he didn't really care much about like Islam. He was very open to religion, so Muslims were allowed to have their own gatherings, were have their own religious services and everything. All religions had that freedom, but it was not an Islamic country, of course. Hijab was not imposed, the head covering for women.
Mm-hmm.
So my grandfather did not allow my mother to go to school because he didn't want her to go to school and see all those freedoms, in a sense. So my mom went to school after 1979, as my grandfather had promised her, but very late. So I think she has experienced a little bit of extremism, and that's why she's more lenient on religion. But it's still politically, she's very, very conservative. She calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. She really believes in that. And I was very close to my grandfather. He's a kind guy. He was a sweet guy, but he had all these extreme ideologies. Once I remember, my female cousin, was sitting on the sofa, and she was watching TV. I was also watching TV somewhere else, and then she stood up to go somewhere else. I went to sit in her place, like exactly where she was sitting. Like 2 minutes later, my grandfather comes and drags me to the room and talks to me like, "Do you know you're not allowed to sit at the place where a woman was sitting because there's heat and it's warm and you will be tempted?" And it was so lost. And like, what the hell is going on? What are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? The heat? What heat? It's my cousin. Like,
yeah.
Chill. But he was very extreme in that sense.
Oh wow.
But yeah, these are things that are like that pushed me further and further away from that ideology, or let me put it this way, from extreme ideology. So throughout my story, I didn't really continue or follow my own religious path or trajectory, but
that's okay.
I took Judaism at some point, and I was fascinated by it after my studies about history, the Nazi Germany. I wanted to go to Germany so badly, but again, I couldn't go because my father didn't allow me to go. And my interest in Judaism grew day by day when I learned more about it, when I learned about the state of Israel, about its innovations and how much it was under attack by the Iranian media, and about this hatred towards Jews, that they were like, we're going to bomb Tel Aviv or Haifa. These are the exact phrases that the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, uses, that we're going to bomb Tel Aviv and Haifa. And I was always questioning this, that they say they're not anti-Semitic and they're just anti-Zionist, but there are Jews living in those areas. If you bomb that area, you're going to kill Jews.
Right.
I asked a couple of my friends who were like, I was more close to them, so they knew a little bit on and off about, like, not exactly my interest in Judaism, but my distance from Islam. And they were like, oh, that's a good question. I never thought of that. So it's like they were being given this picture that we're going to bomb that certain area, but they're not going to give them the details of, like, who lives there, who's going to die, how many people are there, they're going to be women, children, or whatnot. They don't give them the details because it doesn't really matter. It's that ideology, that picture that matters, that gives them strength or joy or excitement or whatnot. And that was sad. So my life trajectory pushed me away from Islam and got me closer and closer to Judaism. And when we spoke, I told you that I didn't really walk away from religion. I walked away from one to another. Mm-hmm. I think I really believed and do believe in the idea of a creator, of somebody who has created us and the whole universe. But I was looking for that divine, that divinity, that supreme power to be more merciful, more intersectional, more woke, if you want to put it this way, and less extreme. And I couldn't find it, neither in Iran, neither in that version of Islam. There are Muslim reformers that I follow on social media, that they call out these extremist ideas, and they're like, okay, we need to stop performing these laws because they're extreme, and this is not good. This is against human rights, and if we want to be a globalized universal religion, and if we're the religion of peace, we need to reform the whole system. And it's nice to see that. I'm happy if they are successful in that effort. If they can do it, that's great. I know you follow the ex-Muslim, maybe the community or hashtag on social media. So there was this other hashtag that I read, and I was like, oh wow, I can relate to many of that. The hashtag was when I was a Muslim.
Yes, I've seen that recently.
You've seen that, yes. It was interesting because I found one common thing that was a common among most of them, and that's when they put pens in between your fingers and they start pressing them. I'm doing it right now, like I'm not pushing it, but they do push it like so hard so that you feel the pain between your fingers, and that happens when you don't study the Quran well. If you answer to a question wrong, or if you question something in a way that you are questioning the foundation of the religion.
This concludes part 1. For more information about the Muslim reform movement, make sure to listen through to the end of part 2. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Most importantly, share the show with someone you trust.